Mayor Hockemer is not here tonight, so I am taking his place. We'll have roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Manley?
Here.
Commissioner Heinzen?
Here.
Commissioner Horsfall? Here. Commissioner Lytle?
Here.
Commissioner Turk and Mayor Hokemer are absent and excused.
Great, so we'll move on to agenda item 3, minutes. Does anybody have any changes to the minutes from the June 5th, 2017 Plan Commission meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Mr. Manley to approve. Do we have a second? Second. Mr. Horsfall. Moving on to, oh yeah, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Nays? Motion carries 4-0. So moving on then to agenda item number 4. This is a public hearing, a conditional use permit. Are we doing it over here? Nope. Oh my God, lordy. I'm way out. Okay, excuse me. Agenda item number 4, initial review for a proposed 80 to 100 unit senior living facility to be located at 841 North Main Street. Mr. Starr.
Thank you. The applicant is requesting an initial review of a proposed 80 to 100 unit senior independent and assisted living facility at 841 North Main Street. This is a project that the Plan Commission has provided an initial review on before. Back in February of 2016, the Plan Commission provided an initial review for a proposed 80 to 100 unit senior independent living facility. Comments from 2016 included concerns about potential access to the property, traffic, and density. In general, in 2016, most Plan Commission members were supportive of the use of the property as a senior housing project and encouraged the applicants to meet with the adjacent neighbors. The project did come back in May of 2017. At that time, the applicant was proposing a 120 to 140 independent senior independent living facility. Concerns from the Plan Commission in May of 2017 included the height and the density. The developer for Development Group has held a neighborhood meetings on March 30th of this year and also July 11th. Changes have been made to the plans based upon those meetings with the neighbors. Some of those changes include a reduction in the density and also a reduction in the building height from 3 stories to 2 stories. From a bulk standpoint, the proposed building would be set back 64 feet from Main Street, 26 feet from the east property line, 40 feet from the north property line, and then 38 feet from the south property line. All those setbacks, the proposed setbacks meet the zoning requirements. The maximum building height in the neighborhood office district, which this property would have to be rezoned to, is 35 feet. In general, the applicant has indicated that the height requirement would be met. Access to the site, there'd be 2 access points. One access would be from the point on South Main or North Main here from the south. That would be limited to a right in, right out. Access on the north would be shared with First Choice Dental. That would have a right in and a left out, and then also a right going out as well. At this time, staff has no concerns with the access to the property. The applicant is proposing underground parking with the project. Access to the underground parking would be from the southern side of the building. A full parking analysis would be completed if the project does move forward. Drainage and stormwater. A stormwater management facility is provided on the south side of the property. Stormwater calculations would obviously be required as the project moves forward. The design itself, as I stated previously, the building was previously 3 stories. The building now has come down to 2 stories in height. The rendering is, I'll just point out, is slightly kind of inaccurate. This underground parking access point here has been removed, and the drive here has been cut off to this point, and there is also underground parking planned in this location. But the building itself is accurate in kind of the design of it. While it's still rather schematic, it does look nice. As the project moves forward, staff recommends the applicant add significant amounts of brick and stone to the property or the project to provide a strong visual presence along Main Street. Conceptual landscaping plans were included in the submittal. This was a key point for the neighbors who live to the east of the site to screen the property. The applicant has put together perspectives showing what that landscaping would look like. There is and you can kind of see it on the screen here, there is a small city-owned piece of property between this project and the houses to the east. The applicant would potentially be looking at installing some of the landscaping within that piece of city-owned property. We're open to that conversation, but obviously would have to work out the details. But the applicant is proposing a significant amount of screening and landscaping in this area. So staff does appreciate the additional landscaping that will help buffer this project from the areas to the east. As the Plan Commission is aware, the city does have a residential phasing policy that was put in place in 2012, which generally limits the amount of multifamily that can be constructed each year to 25 to 50 units. There is an exemption to the policy that includes senior and housing types of facilities. So this project does have the potential to be exempted from the policy. Similar to last couple times we've looked at this, staff continues to be supportive of the use in the property as a senior housing type project. We have no concerns with the type use. Access to this property will be very important to ensure access is shared with First Choice Dental. No additional cuts will be allowed in the median in the middle of the street. Further, as we've stated previously, a deed restriction would be required with this project to ensure that residents in this project would be 55 and plus. The reason for that is just with potential parking on here, we want to ensure that the site is being served both currently and in the future for seniors and is not opened up in the future to any age group. Staff is also now comfortable with the density of 80 to 100 units. We appreciate the applicant reducing that from 120 to 140. So with that, staff recommends the Plan Commission review the submitted materials and provide feedback to the applicants. I know the applicants here tonight, and I think they wanted to just introduce themselves and maybe explain a few things about the project.
Good evening. Ron Henshaw with Ford Development Group, the developer of this project, and I just want to comment on a couple of things. First of all, we think this is just an ideal project for this location. When it was brought to us, based on the submittals that occurred in 2016, and we learned about the project in 2017, we, given the traffic that occurs on Main Street, given the nominal traffic that this project would generate, we think it's an ideal project for this location. I'm going to just comment on a couple of things. Adam did an outstanding job of summarizing the project from beginning to end, and I just want to comment on, enhance just a few things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Yeska from JSD Professional Services, who will go into a little more detail with the site plan just to talk about some of the nuances. When we last presented the concept plan at that larger density, there was a couple of things that have occurred since then that are, I think, important. One of them is we had just received a market study in only a week earlier, I think, than when we presented our concept plan, so it was already in stages of completion, and that helped us. That was one of the things that contributed to us slightly reducing the size of the facility. And the second thing is that we're still working to secure an operator. We think we're close to a final decision, so that operator will actually help us determine some of the further things, the actual size within that 180 to 100 range and actual type of units. So we're making good progress in getting a number of things finalized. Based on feedback that we got from both yourselves and ultimately the council and then a second neighborhood meeting, the feedback that we've gotten is positive, and we think we're on the right track here. What I want to highlight from the neighborhood meeting is the biggest concern of the neighborhood was really twofold. One was size, height, what it would do to their view and what it would make them feel like living next to it. And we ultimately then, the renderings that showed the street view with the landscaping that Adam showed a few moments ago, I think, and in the neighborhood, obviously, those residents will have a chance to weigh in at a future time. But I think from our perspective, satisfied ourselves that basically taking that building from 3-story to 2-story, changing the density, and even though we have a gable roof on it now versus a flat roof, with that landscaping and that view from street level, I think it makes for a very comfortable and appealing residential look for the community there. The other thing that they highlighted was concern with any noise issues. Would there be outside compressors, air conditioners, and the like? And when the garbage collection occurred, would that occur early in the morning and be something that would wake them up since they're so close and adjacent to the site? And we've addressed those as well, which Kevin will go over with you, making some changes to entrances and dealing with some of those concerns as well. So I think we've come back with a project that hopefully meets with your approval and answered a lot of the questions and issues that were out there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Yeska at JSD Professional Services. Let him chat about a few more things, okay? All right, thank you.
Hi everybody, Kevin Yeska with JSD. So as Ron had touched on, a few site changes that we had made since we last presented, and one probably stands out the most is the access drive up to the north end of the property. We have eliminated that after getting a little bit of feedback from that adjacent owner at the neighborhood meeting. We looked at that internally and with the architect and thought that underground parking garage probably won't be generating that much traffic that we need to have a second access drive coming out of the north end of the building. It really helps from an engineering standpoint in the hopes that it would reduce the size of that wall that we would be looking at to the north end of the project. As Ron had touched on, that would also be the area for our trash enclosure to be situated, and then trash also to be picking up more of our operational side of things. It would be an area where loading and unloading would occur for the kitchen space. So as much as we wanted to, reduce the amount of traffic coming out of the north end of the building, I think that was the best solution here. Really, that access drive up on the north end would just be for service to the building. A couple of comments that we had received from Adam regarding stormwater. We're still working through some items with First Choice Dental, and we'll be looking at that very closely here in the coming weeks of how their pond is handled. They have a pond there south of their building. There's overland relief of that pond during a larger event, so how can we capture that water in a storm structure and get it into the city storm system? So we'll be looking at that, and then also taking a closer look at the ponds throughout our project, how we will meet the city's requirements and DNR requirements. So the details are a little bit vague there on this concept submittal, but we're definitely aware of them. Whether or not we do surface treatment for this project or we go underground, we haven't quite decided on that yet and analyzed it to the fullest extent, but we are aware, and we'll be looking at that more closely. One last thing too from PRA, no members of their team are here tonight, but I just wanted to touch on the building architecturally. Right now we're just showing this as a massing concept to you. We'll definitely be coming next time with more detail, but our biggest change here was going from that 3-story flat roof, more urban setting, more urban look, and we've transitioned to a Craftsman style hip and gabled roof or gabled roof, give it a little bit more of that warm residential feel. So we'll definitely have more details to come next time we present. If you have any other site plan questions, let me know. I'm here to answer any. Thank you.
Planning Commission members, any questions or comments that you would like to make at this time? Mr. Manley.
Thank you. I'm happy to see that the density has been reduced. I think that's favorable, and I agree with Mr. Sayer that it's architecturally it's a very nice looking proposal. I think using high quality materials, it would be a very nice looking addition to our community. I still believe though that the size of this site, 3-some acres, we could do a great development like this just about anywhere else in the city, as opposed to on North Main Street, where it's highly desirable for retail or commercial office type land uses. I'm a little bit concerned with using our finite and rapidly depleting Main Street and Verona Avenue inventory on so much housing, as opposed to particularly housing that's not mixed use, as opposed to other more retail type uses. But that's about the only complaint I have about the project is where it's physically located. I think it's a great proposal. I think that given the demographics we have and the grain of our population, the need for this type of housing is only going to grow with time. So I think it's a great thing, and it'd be good for Verona to have it, but I just wouldn't be my first choice from a planning standpoint to put it on North Main Street.
All right, thank you, Mr. Manley. Any others? Mr. Horswell.
Yeah, I like the changes that were made, and if it was coming back like this with details that we've talked about already, I'm all in favor of approving it. So, thanks.
I also think that it's a very good looking project, and I think it's a reasonable fit for the neighborhood. Mr. Lytle?
Not a ton to add here. I would say that obviously some of the devils are going to be in the details in terms of expectations for exterior materials, and striking that balance between switching to a more residential country view versus the urban design that was there. I like the change. I think it will fit in with the neighboring housing better, but keeping in mind especially the side facing Main Street to try to keep the high quality materials there as much as possible, I think, as Adam pointed out. The thing that wasn't clear to me, the way the parking wraps around the north side of the building now, and just the parking and drives as shown, it almost looks like you're reserving the option of extending that northernmost part of the parking to the north, or is that there purely to be where you put the dumpsters and to give people room to turn around?
Yeah, that area would just be reserved for dumpster turnaround or a small delivery truck to pull up to the north back into a service store and unload kitchen supplies, food, things of that nature.
Okay. I think the other thing that wasn't clear to me from the perspectives that you included, I think sort of the entry to the covered parking was in transition as you were doing those. It appears like the building sort of steps as you go from the northern L to the southern T, upside down T, and it looks like you would almost have to have basically 3.5 stories exposed on the far south end, the west facing portion, for that entrance to work, and especially there where we're looking at 2 full stories, a non-hipped roof, as well as exposure for entrance. Just try to keep in mind ways to break that up to keep it from looking like a giant wall that's essentially 4 stories tall.
Yeah, on the concept site plan, we actually have a few elevations that we preliminarily called out. That parking lot out in front of the main entrance, we're at like 986, and then you would be coming down to 975 down at that underground entry that south T.
Okay.
So yeah, we are looking at a pretty substantial grade transition to get to that underground entry, and then yes, there would be a bit of exposure on the south end of the building that we would either bring some of the architectural materials down, so it's not just a concrete wall, and then we would screen that pretty heavily with landscaping, especially evergreens that would, have green foliage all year long. So.
Great. Yeah, I think just passing those along for when those at the next stage come back, that's some of the things I'll be looking at.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.
Excuse me, just before you go, I have one question with respect to the shared access. I think you mentioned earlier that there have been discussions with First Choice, at least with respect to the stormwater. Are you confident that you'll be able to reach an agreement for the shared access as well? Or maybe that's already done or in progress?
It's still in progress. I think that discussion had kicked off back in 2016. It hasn't kicked back off again, but yeah, we're still in progress of looking at that.
Okay.
Kevin's correct in that we don't have anything formal in place, but we've had discussions with First Choice as recently as 2 weeks ago in regards to that earlier conversation and verifying that there would be no issues, and we're just discussing some of the requirements. They need just a little bit, maybe a small amount of shared parking or something of that nature. Once we have that figured out, we'll let you know, but there should be no issues with the shared access.
All right, great, thank you.
All right.
Mr. Manley?
Thank you. Question, Adam, if you could go back to the picture of the rendering with the landscaping shown. Those look like pretty mature trees, and I'm wondering if that would be what would be planted immediately, is trees at that level of maturity, or is that in anticipation of what they would grow into?
I guess from the landscape side of things, unfortunately, it would have to be in anticipation to, looking at that perspective. We're probably talking about a 6-inch diameter, 8-inch diameter evergreen, and to plant that immediately, the success rate of that tree is very, very low. We would look to spec some larger ornamental trees, something 2.5-inch caliper. I would feel confident that those wouldn't die within a year or two, and then the evergreens, something in that 8 to 10 foot range, we could probably get from a nursery, but it just wouldn't be possible to drop the 30 foot tall evergreen there that on day one. Although we'd love to, they wouldn't survive.
And then if I could just ask a follow-up question about that retention basin at the south property line. I'm wondering how close that actually is to the property line. It looks like it's very close just from the site plan, and I wonder if do we ever put restrictions on how close we can site a detention basin to a somebody's residential property? Does that create safety concerns? Do we require fencing in those instances? I'm just curious because I don't remember seeing something like this before.
There aren't any requirements necessarily for fencing unless it's going to be a deep wet pond, but we would mandate, and Kevin's been through it before, we would require that the storage all take place on their property. So their high water elevation would have to be maintained on their property. We require a certain amount of freeboard in the projects as well. So whatever storage they have to have, we have to have a certain amount of freeboard in feet above their high water elevation, all maintained on their property. They can't put the berm off on the other side of the property. There is an outlet right there as well, so their stormwater will be restricted to a release rate, and then it'll go into the storm sewer, into the city system right there as well. But we'll look at it when they send it to us for review. They'll have to do a full-blown stormwater management plan for it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lytle?
It probably doesn't need to be said, but on the subject of trees and landscaping, what was otherwise, I think, a very universally lauded project on Main Street, the complaints around losing the trees that were on South Main. So as you sequence construction, everything you can do to minimize having to take out any of those mature trees right there along the street.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually discussed that today after just up the road. They had a giant oak fall down a few weeks ago. And I think one thing we'll do is get an arborist in to look at the condition of those trees. And I mean, we don't want those to fall over and hurt somebody once this development goes forward. But yeah, we want to preserve them as well. And we talked about the public sidewalk that comes onto our property. There would need to be an easement there. So in the event that those trees are saved, yeah, they're massive oaks and they look really nice. So.
I have one question for you, Adam. In connection with the residential phasing policy, in your report, you just note that if the project is approved, it has the potential to be exempted from the policy. And I'm just curious why just the potential?
Ultimately, that decision would be up to the council if they choose to exempt it or not. It's a policy that's been adopted by the council.
Okay.
So it's not up, staff can make a recommendation on that, but the council would be the one to determine that.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you back. All right. Moving on to agenda item number 5. Mr. Sayre, please.
Thank you. This is a plan development concept plan that would allow for the construction of a 2,200 square foot Starbucks coffee store at the southwest of Farm and Fleet at 600 Hometown Circle. This is a concept PUD, so this is step 2 of the plan development process. Step 1 is a meeting with staff. Step 2 is a concept review that goes before the Plan Commission and Common Council. This is an opportunity for the Council and Plan Commission to provide feedback on the project without actually acting on the project. Step 3 is the General Development Plan, the GDP. So we have a public hearing before the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission then makes a recommendation to the Common Council. The GDP is where the zoning entitlements are granted, and that includes any zoning exemptions granted with the project. And finally, we have step 4 of the plan development process, which includes a public hearing before the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission then makes a recommendation to the Common Council. The PIP are the precise details of the plan, site plans, architectural renderings, landscaping, photometric, stormwater, all the details of any project. So for tonight's sake, though, we are on step 2 of step 4 of the plan development process, the concept review. As I said previously, the applicant is requesting a conceptual review to allow for the construction of a Starbucks. That would be southwest of Farm and Fleet. The site in question is circled on your screen here in the reddish orangish oval. This site would be located just north of Rainbow Childcare, which is wrapping up construction, and then obviously south of Farm and Fleet. This is in the existing parking lot of Farm and Fleet. The project itself, the site is zoned suburban commercial SC. It's also part of the existing Farm and Fleet plan unit development. The Farm and Fleet PUD was required for the monument signs that are on the property. And finally, it is also part of the Downtown Design and Use Overlay District. The project itself currently does not meet the minimum paved surface setbacks requirements of 5 feet on the side, 10 feet on the rear, and 15 in from the street. The reason for that is simply just it's in a parking lot, so it makes it more challenging when the site is already 100% asphalt. So that is one exemption that the project may require. The second thing as well is the applicant is requesting exemption for the building setback. The downtown overlay district requires a minimum setback of 15 feet and a maximum setback of 25 feet. The building currently would not meet that setback from where the street is to the building itself, so an exemption would be required for that too. Another additional exemption that would be required would be the 50-foot street frontage requirement. All lots are required to have a minimum of 50 feet of street frontage. This lot itself would not have that 50-foot requirement. Obviously, if approved, the project would require a variety of easements along with a CSM to carve off and create this lot. But that would be an exemption that would have to be granted by the Plan Commission and Common Council. Access to the site and parking, the applicant is proposing 20 parking spaces with this project. As a result of this, they would lose a net total of 46 spaces from the Farm and Fleet parking lot right now. Initially, staff doesn't have any concerns with the parking for the Starbucks. Staff also does not have any concerns with the loss of parking in Farm and Fleet's parking lot. In general, the Farm and Fleet parking lot is usually not completely full, and I think to lose these spaces wouldn't have an adverse, any issues with Farm and Fleet. One thing to point out is that there is a shared parking easement between Rainbow Childcare and Farm and Fleet. That shared agreement was put in place when Rainbow was constructed, so Rainbow could meet their minimum parking requirements. If this project moves forward, that agreement would have to be amended. Pedestrian connections to the site would be provided from the sidewalk that currently terminates just north of Rainbow Childcare. It would be brought across the drive-through and connected into the property. Staff has no concerns with the sidewalk connection. Access to the site would be from Hometown Circle. People would enter from this location here, from the south, potentially park in front of the building or travel north to the drive-through that would wrap around the building. One item that staff has requested is a turning template for the trucks that will be using the Farm and Fleet parking lot. The WB 67 trucks that use the west side of the actual Farm and Fleet building. We just want to ensure these trucks will have enough clearance to make the turn in this location, so they're not going to cross over the drive-through lanes or hit any of the pavement that's out there. One of the points that staff does also recommends is the applicant actually, there's a drive-through lane, there's also a bypass lane around the drive-through. Staff recommends that be paved and not actually, painted and not paved, just for stormwater purposes and to ensure the drainage is cleanly kind of kept going in the current direction that it currently goes. This will allow water to continue to flow through the existing stormwater pond to the west. The drive-through itself, the applicant has requested that exemption to allow the drive-through in the front of the building. That's something that's not allowed as part of that downtown overlay district. One of the comments staff has on the drive-through and bypass lane is staff recommends that the drive-up lane, once it gets past the drive-through window, actually merge kind of together into one instead of having two separate exits into the parking lot at this location. So at some point in here, these two lanes would merge and we'd have a single exit coming out of the facility instead of two. It would just make more sense and have a little more ease of exiting that facility. A couple of items here. Staff also does recommend that a stop sign be added in a location here and also a location obviously exiting drive-through. But just to stop control people as they come to this intersection. Traffic from Hometown Circle coming north would still continue to be free flow, but the rest of the points would be stopped just to ensure that we're not creating any traffic issues and concerns at this location. Once again, just a blow up of kind of what we're looking at. Looking to the north, it would be the Farm and Fleet building. South, once again, is Rainbow Childcare. Once again, this bypass lane could potentially merge into one lane at about this location here. The building itself, the applicant submitted a variety of concepts that have been used elsewhere around the country. Staff is open to many of these ideas. I think the applicant is requesting feedback from the Plan Commission of just what the thoughts are. Typical of any project, staff does recommend that the applicant use high-end design features such as stone and brick, similar to a few of these other projects that are found elsewhere in the country. But staff recommends the Plan Commission provide feedback to the applicant on the design of the project itself, of the building specifically. Monument signage for the project would not be allowed. The applicant, if they request any type of monument signage, would have to go on the two existing Farm and Fleet monument signs that are on Verona Avenue. Landscaping, as we stated previously, the site currently is 100% asphalt, impervious. As part of this project, obviously, additional areas on the property would become green. The applicant has provided those the green space areas in the site plan. The applicant is requesting an exemption to the 25% landscape surface ratio of having the site as 25% green. Staff does not support that exemption. I know the applicant has indicated they're pretty close to getting close to that 25%. But that's an exemption that staff just won't support just for a variety of reasons. So we recommend that the applicant continue to work on the plans, refine those in further detail, but they'll need to hit that 25%. Long-term plans, this property was obviously planned for a future parking lot that it was constructed for. It's the still same kind of use because it is a commercial use in a commercial parking lot. So from a long-term standpoint, staff does believe that potentially this could fit from a use standpoint. So with that, staff is open to kind of having this type of use constructed in the Farm and Fleet parking lot. I know it's a slightly different type building design and type layout that I know the city hasn't seen before. I think this type of design and use is more typically found in outlots in, say, shopping centers or in a mall situation. But I know the staff and the applicant have worked together to kind of refine this site plan and make changes. I think this is the third or fourth site plan at least that I've seen on this to try to get this the look to function and work kind of from a zoning and staff level standpoint. But in general, we are comfortable with the proposed use in this location on the property. So with that, staff recommends the Plan Commission review the submitted materials and provide feedback to the applicant. I know the architect is here tonight, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Sayer. Questions or comments? Mr. Manley.
Thank you. I think it's a good use of what is currently, at least to almost every trip I've gone to Farm and Fleet, a good use of what is right now empty parking space. Adam, if you would go back to the slide that has the renderings or the elevations of other, I think a lot of those look very nice to my eye, and thinking about what's out there already, the one in the upper right, yeah, that one seems like it would be a decent fit out there. But I think it's, any of those would probably work. Just one question for you, Adam. I want to make sure I understand what your recommendation was relative to the bypass lane, and were you saying that not all of it should be paved or none of it should be paved, or I didn't quite understand what you were recommending?
Correct. So a couple things with the bypass lane. We recommended that the separation between the drive-through and the bypass lane here would be striped and not have a curb separation in it. So just stripe that as a line that will help the dumpster location to get the trucks in for the dumpsters as well.
Okay.
One thing I didn't mention is we'd like to see this kind of, as you come into the site, we like to see that straightened out so it doesn't come in as an angle either. And then finally, when you get past the actual window itself, we'd like to see these two lanes kind of merge into one. So once you kind of get to this point here, it's actually one lane and not two lanes. And we figured from the standpoint of once you get your coffee or whatever, at that point you're typically heading out. You're not stopping and sitting there for a while. So, and that's more just from a safety standpoint of if you have two cars potentially sitting there, it's just makes it even more complicated. So if we can merge that down to one at the end, it'd be a lot safer.
Thank you. That all of that sounds very reasonable.
Just to follow up, I think that's the concept of the way in which the driveways work at Culver's right now. I think there's this outside lane, and eventually they leave the not the parking lot, but they leave the drive-through lane as a single. So we've seen that before, and it works successfully. Mr. Lytle.
No real comments on the layout. I think we've been quite surprised to see how overbuilt the parking lot is for Farm and Fleet, and like Mr. Manley said, to get some beneficial use out of that and provide an amenity for people. That's a big improvement. layout-wise, I think, it's an awfully long and skinny lot, but I'm assuming you all have worked at other locations or have examples of other locations that have made that layout work. That westerly entrance to Farm and Fleet, inevitably there's someone stopping when they're not supposed to, or the opposite. And so anything we can do to help make that a little more clear as part of this project. It almost seems like you enter and you have the entire Farm and Fleet parking lot to choose from, and some people actually go down the lane, and most people cut across multiple rows of striped parking. So that is a challenge that certainly isn't really made any worse by this development, and actually may give us some opportunities to sort of make that clearer to people as they enter. So beyond that, the only other comment I have is I absolutely support Mr. Sayers and staff's suggestion that we only allow monument signage using existing Farm and Fleet signage.
Thank you, Mr. Lidle. Mr. Horsfall.
Yeah, again, I kind of echo everyone else's comment. I think it's a good idea to have some building here that will take up some of the parking lot, and I'm okay with the design as is provided here, with the exemptions that Adam mentioned.
My thoughts are consistent with what you've already heard. I think it's a good, it'll be very welcome in Verona. It'll be very welcome in my house. All right. Moving on to agenda item number 6, reports and comments from the planning department. Mr. Sayre.
Thank you. So I just have a quick update on development projects. I know Mr. Manley needs to leave here pretty quickly, so we'll get through this. In your packet, there was just a brief update on a variety of projects that are occurring in the city. As the project name, location of where it's located, the status of where that project's at as far as staff is aware, and there's some basic details of kind of what the project is or was. I won't go through it, but just make the Plan Commission aware. We'll be doing monthly updates here to you of just having this list in the packet. This is going to be kind of the evolving type thing of what it looks like and how we use it. But more or less, we'll just be listing off projects in a similar fashion to this, just so you're aware of what you've approved or what maybe you haven't approved, and just the status of it in general, of what we know about it at the time that we're writing these up. So a couple things coming forward here in September is the Northwest Neighborhood Plan that will be on a public hearing before the Plan Commission in September. And we most likely might have a couple other projects on that agenda as well. So it could be a busy agenda. First, the Plan Commission meeting in September, just so everyone was aware, it's the first Tuesday because of the holiday. I believe it's September 5th. So just mark your calendars accordingly. And that's all I have.
I have one very, very quick question. I'm just sort of curious about velocity, if you know the likelihood of that starting soon or starting at all.
Yeah, I know I spoke with the applicant a couple months ago, and they were working on their the building plans for it. I have not spoken to them recently. When I spoke with them a couple months ago, they were planning on starting this fall. But I can follow up with them between the next meeting and see if I can get some better information.
Thank you.
Steve.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Host.
Adam, how did you organize your table here? Is it by date, by size projects, by?
It was done quickly, so there wasn't much organization to it, to be honest with you.
Okay.
It was done at the last day or two before the packets went out.
I'm
Do
just
you have any
wondering-
suggestions of how it would be easier, I guess?
Okay. Yeah,
I'd be open to suggestions if you like date or if you like name or if...
It'd be interesting to see where we're waiting on construction versus waiting on developer versus, waiting on whatever.
We can do it by approval date if that's easier, because then we can kind of put them in that
Well,
order.
I'm more interested in, is it
Oh.
under construction or are we
Gotcha.
waiting on us or waiting on them? It's those three kind of check mark type things.
It's typically on them, so, but we'll organize it that way.
Okay. Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Sayre? All right, then moving on to agenda item number 7. Any reports, comments from any of the Members of the Plan Commission? Seeing none, we can move on to agenda item number 8, adjournment. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye. I don't need a motion for that. I don't think. Okay. Could we have? Second. Oh, there we go. Right, Manly Horsefall, thank you. We are adjourned. Oh, we have to vote now. Sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Yes.